Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and this is another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. This is the second in our series of preview streams featuring the landscape from our upcoming expansion pack, Legacy of Morgoth. Last week we went through the kind of farmland, hillland, marshlands of Amberil, and this week we're going to go into Khûd Zagin, some of the more deserty, arid regions, a take on this kind of environment that we've never done before. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream and are joining for the first time, this is a world design focused stream, so I'm going to be taking you through the landscape, talking about the landscape and what we do in order to build it and how we research it and create it. I'm not going to be answering questions about things like game balance, PvMP, lag. There are some bits and pieces of it that I can talk about as they relate to my role, but in general, higher level lag topics I can't talk about. So we're going to keep it on world and level design stuff. Housing a little bit as well. I actually just wrapped up a bunch of work for housing items for this expansion pack too. So we're gonna, for the next hour or so, be running around the landscape and taking your questions and just taking in the look and feel of Khûd Zagin. Last stream, we kind of started in a very similar location, except I was facing more that way towards Amberil. But now we're looking to the south. Let me bring up the map super quick so you can see where we're at. Here we are right here on the edges of Umbar. Back out a little bit and you can see our placeholder map. And we're looking here across the river to the south towards Khûd Zagin. For those of you that were here on the last stream, you might notice the map, while the image itself hasn't changed, you might be seeing more icons popping up here. And that's because as we've been progressing through our development, we've been layering in more and more features and systems. Prominently right now, you can see all of the stable masters. The biggest thing that I think I need to do now with the stable masters is actually get them into testing, both my own unit testing and QA and our Palantir test space in general. But I need to make some changes because we do have a couple of these stable masters that are considered the far-ranging stable masters. So they'll take you right now just to Umbar, but whenever we have a stable master that's kind of considered a hub stable master that goes out to other regions, we tend to think of it as a far-ranging stable. This is also an in-development build, so anything that you see in here is probably subject to change. We're continuing our development and continuing our polish as it is right now. And hopefully within the next few weeks we'll be having our first Bolor preview so that you all can hop in and explore around in it. We're not quite sure whether that preview will be for all of the landscape or if we're going to limit it to certain chunks just so we can focus, play our attention on things. But as we get closer to that, we'll iron those details out and make sure that you all know what we're going to be testing, when we're going to be testing it, and how you can get access to it. Also, I tend to talk a lot. So let's see. I'm hearing some people saying they're hearing me twice. Let's see. Maybe if I talk a little bit quieter so that things aren't being picked up. Here, let me mute the stream. I think that's what it is. I came across this when I was doing my stream with Orion as well. We were getting a terrible echo and realized it was because the browser that I am viewing the chat on wasn't muted. So that should resolve the issue for everyone. Sorry about the echo, but we should be all set now. All right. So as I was saying, right before I noticed the chat about the echo, I tend to talk a lot. I get a bit long-winded. So if you haven't seen me take a drink in a while, I've got my black tea and I've got my seltzer water here. So if you haven't seen me take a drink in a while, please let me know so I can pause and take a drink. All right. Also, I do apologize. We were talking about echo, but as far as other audio artifacts go, I have a sparrow that has decided the front stoop outside of my office door is the place to be. So it has been very chatty all day today. So if you hear a bird just chirping up a storm, that's what it is, and I apologize for that. Anyways, let us head across the water here. So one of the things that to note, and actually let me boost up my run speed a little bit as well, is like whenever we add a new region, we do often tend to break down walls where they once were. For this update, we did have kind of the dense reeds blocking access to the other side of the river, and now those reeds are gone, or at least the physics barrier versions of those reeds are gone, and we can actually swim across the river to start exploring to the south. One of my goals always when we're building these regions is to try to find ways, where there are borders and boundaries to connect with other regions and kind of bring down those impassables where it makes sense to. The boundary between Umbar and Amberil, there's still kind of a ridge line there, but there are a couple of openings here and there that you can use to climb up into it. To get into Khûd Zagin from Umbar, you really just have to cross the river. The area that I'm running in right now is still a little bit Amberil, but also the northern parts of Khûd Zagin, where because it's right on the river, it is not particularly deserty because you do have the water right there. But once we kind of cross up over this hill, that's when things will start to change a little bit, and you'll start seeing more deserts, and you'll start seeing more occasional oases. We had talked about last week the introduction of new creature types. So here we have, and I think this will be actually one of the first regions where we're really starting to see some of this new creature art. We have our scorpions. They're just chilling out. What do we have here? Oh, and we have our little hedgehog critters running around on the landscape as well. Alrighty, well, let's head our way across and down here. One of the things that's interesting about a couple of these regions is, there's bits and pieces of ruins and civilizations from several different factions. We have, what you see here is bits and pieces of Gondor and Numenor, whereas as you cross up and over, you'll start seeing some of like the Shigani influences or the Hamadi influences, or even some influences from Ordak. The Haradrim. Come up here. These are one of my favorite new pieces that we've had. I think we got these. I don't remember when we got these, but I really like these cows. They are great. Palm branches. So we're also getting our resource nodes in. Currently, there's a issue that we're working to resolve with some of the new resource features that are coming into the game. But you can see just our usual mix of resource nodes and whatnot. As you look here, we have jackals, which are kind of patterned after the wolves that you're familiar with from Eriador, but with a little bit of a fresh look to them. Over here, we've got our fennec foxes running around, kind of prancing around actually on the landscape. So now we've crossed into Khûd Zagin, and we're seeing it's a bit more aridy, a bit more desert. Not as much for trees, but there's still low-lying rocks, there's scrub. It is arid, but not desolate. Let's see if there are any questions real quick before I continue on going through. Aside from the comments on my echoing at the very beginning. So Yao Deco Demiu asks, one thing I always wanted to ask, instead of having mobs spawning every 20 or so meters, would it be better to have packs of mobs spawning every 50 or so meters? So I think mileage can vary on that. One of the benefits of having kind of the mixed spawns as individuals spread out over is it does make it a little bit easier for individual players to tackle things. Like if they're hunting the landscape content, they're trying to complete quests, having packs of things can be hard for certain classes to handle. So that's why things are spread out. And really when you start heading into camps and whatnot, that's where you get your more concentrated things. I have been thinking about ideas and ways that we can kind of use our skill systems, our monster skill systems, to generate mini camps and whatnot. And that's not something that's going to be happening for this, but is something that I've been thinking about myself as just ways to simplify implementation of things on landscape. We did that a little bit for things like some of our warbands, where we have a singular creature who then generates basically his entourage or their entourage. Um, and that can be one solution. But those are usually better suited for specific encounters as opposed to scattering them over landscape, at least in the kind of game that this is, or at least in the kinds of areas that this is meant to be. But yeah, it's something that is in my head and in my mind. All right. So as you can see, coming up over the hill here, you can kind of see the silhouette of the fortress that was there in the distance. There's a little bit of far view stuff that we need to work on here, is that's floating. But as we continue with polish, those things will get resolved as well. So let's see. Ponton Finbury says, for the direction we are going deeper into Harad, will there be any graphical effects that on our characters for the desert-like areas? Kind of like how currently, if in the cold places, you see characters' breaths or footprints in the snow, or has desert equivalent been thought of? We discussed that a little bit. I think I've talked about in the past about as our team persists through year and year, and team members leave, new team members come on, we kind of have a little bit of institutional loss of knowledge. And there were some aspects of systems like the forest shell breath effects that while we would have liked to have something done for that, we didn't have kind of the time or expertise to get that set up for this expansion pack. We do have weather systems that are unique to Khûd Zagin and Urashtar, which I'll show off later in the stream a little bit. I wasn't able to get the particle effects going to show off for this through commands and whatnot, but I can show you what the day file will look like for the stormy and rainy weather systems in this region. And then you all can imagine that there's also like dust blowing and sand blowing effects associated with it as well. Let's see. One person, B. Smith, asking hedgehog mount. Maybe for very, very tiny hobbits at some point in the future, but giant hedgehogs, I think, are something that aren't in our immediate future. I'm really liking the like rolling sandiness of this landscape here. One of the things that I would really like to do in the future is find a way to make, both to expand the distance at which full resolution terrain itself renders, because right now you can see here in the distance the far terrain happening, and it's more of a like low resolution landscape with more of a programmatic like normal map bump map applied to it, as opposed to something that's really reflective of what the landscape is. And I would love to be able to find a way to change that in the future, and we've had discussions about it and what we can do to help with that. We did have some stuff in the work to be able to allow players to adjust the full resolution, the distance that the full resolution landscape renders out before it turns into far terrain. It's just a matter of us getting more testing on it. But that would be really helpful for helping the terrain just feel better even at like medium distances. Eros216 asks, any real-world deserts you used as starting reference when building this region? So I think we're leaning into sort of northern Africa, far western Asia, Middle Eastern deserts. It's not one specific desert, but there are certainly influences pulled from each of those in order to get the look and feel that we're leaning towards. We certainly like look to real world locations for inspiration, It's one of the things that I think helps our landscapes feel the way they do is by having those inspirations to work off of. But it is tricky to, it's we don't always want to completely exactly crib off of a real world location if we can avoid it, because that sometimes hems us in on what we can achieve and what we can do. If we're too narrowly focused on trying to make a space look exactly like this region or exactly like that area of world. ASVP asks, how do 64-bit servers make your job easier from a landscape design perspective? Honestly, I don't think the 64-bit servers really impact how we approach landscape design too much, at least as yet. We're still learning, we're still taking information in and learning what 64-bit servers mean for us as far as performance goes, as far as um, you know memory size, lag. Like, we're still taking a lot of that learning into consideration, and I think we'll be continuing to do that throughout the rest of the year. What it certainly has helped us do is um, be able to dedicate more time on the tools back end of things to look at and understand and see, oh, hey, like, here are, and this is not specifically related to 64-bit servers, but it just gives us more opportunity to have tools time to develop tools and analytic support for figuring out, oh, hey, this land block took this long to load on a 32-bit server versus it took this long to load on a 64-bit server, and here are the things that it was hanging on, here are the spikes, here are the valleys. Like, it's given us that opportunity to kind of look at performance from a direction that is somewhat novel to us compared to how we used to look at it in the past. We were really looking at it from just like the frame rate perspective before, and now we're thinking like, okay, entity counts, okay, unique object counts, looking at it from, oh, can we take this set of assets that we've used often and turn that into a like shared asset that isn't going to be able to have any like modifiers applied to it and whatnot. So it's those sorts of things, trying to find places where we can optimize our assets and our usage of assets just in general for the betterment of the game, but not specifically for or as a part of the implementation of the 64-bit servers. Actually, before I head down to Jarush, let's head up here real quick. And it's starting to get to be, we're getting some nice sunsets here. It'll be nighttime soon, so I think at some point I'm going to switch this back to midday so that we have, a good amount of sunlight to continue our tour. Let me find my way up here. I might need to create myself a jetpack in order to do this, because I don't think I have one on this character. So there's my jetpack. All right. There we go. There's the road. I was just a little bit off from it. So to kind of go back to the weather effects, we had talked about heat shimmer effect. I think we are gonna, for the short term anyways, lean more towards the weather effects in the region. Oh, hold on, let me rocket jump up. Nope. All right. Maybe I can get unstuck from here. This is the fun about being a game, or being an update in active development, finding all of these little potholes. And let's set this up to So what we have up here is, ruins of the region, Shigani culture, but with a little bit of the Church of Sauron co-opting it. I believe this is meant to be a stronghold of the Ordak, the Ordakai, which you can see here. I don't know that this area has been specifically populated as a camp yet, but you can see the decorations and whatnot. There are no monsters in it. Alex Mers says, can you explain a little bit more about the older civilizations from this expansion? You said Numenor, but I didn't hear the others. So there are a lot, and unfortunately, not being specifically steeped in the lore, I'm not really going to be able to speak too directly or specifically about those things. There are better people than I for that. And actually, yesterday, the OneRing.net, our lead world designer, Chris Pearson, joined them to talk a little bit about the expansion pack, and they did spend a good amount of time talking about the kingdoms and civilizations. Oh, hey there, Snake. One of our new creatures. Is this one of our new creatures? Yep, one of our new creatures. Talking about the kingdoms and civilizations that may have been present in this area. They are numerous, and it's a lot of warring factions that have overtaken, and then they themselves have fallen over many, many years. A lot of these factions were influenced at one point by Morgoth and then by Sauron. So there's a lot of history of meddling from powers above in this region. So here we are in Jarush, one of the hubs of Khûd Zagin. You can start to see the Milky, or not the Milky Way, but the star field showing up here in the distance. So Loamfind asks, is it difficult to create a desert-like region where you cannot use trees, bushes, and grass? I think it's certainly a different challenge than we usually have. You can see here too, my data is not built right in quite the way it should be, because there's transparency that's missing here that needs to go in. And you can see here through the ground, transporter accidents even affect the ground. It's interesting that there are rocks underneath the ground. We might need to adjust our scene files so that they are not going down that deep. But so we'll start heading to the west now. I'm going to kind of crisscross back and forth a little bit, a couple of times through this region, because it is fairly big. And there's a lot of ground cover, but it's also very open. And there's a couple of different spaces through it. You have your more open desert spaces, but then you also have craggy, hilly valleys and canyons as well. So let's see if I'll pause here and look for some more questions. Let's see. Pomelo Elmbrook says, do the new enemies, like scorpions, have new mechanics and skills? In Gundabad, the Ukrash just use the same skills that the Grodbog do. I'm not sure specifically. Certainly in instances and whatnot, those are where you're really going to find the kind of meat and potato new skills. I would guess that many of the creatures here on the landscape, if not using some of the same skill types, using very similar skills, because of them, by just virtue of them being somewhat similar creature archetypes. But that is more of a question for our game systems team, the people that create the skills for those landscape monsters, to answer, than it is for me. Let's see. Antiwarg says, do you have plans in the future in raids to have unique monsters, not just mobs from landscape? So again, I'm not exactly sure what all is going into raids, but there certainly are plans to have unique characters associated in those raids. As far as trash mobs and whatnot goes, I couldn't say for certain. I'm going to change this back to here. Let's go through for more questions. So for those who joined later, where is this region more specifically? So this region, Khûd Zagin, is part of the 4 regions that make up the Valley of Ikorban. It is to the southeast-ish of Umbar. Ambarel, the first region we previewed last week, is basically directly east from the Cape of Umbar, and Khûd Zagin is to the south-southeast, basically right across the river. So Pomelo Elmbrook says, if the scorpions and cobras are enemy monsters and not critters, can they be bigger? They look really small. One of the things that's important for us as we create landscape mobs and encounters is making sure we have a bit of a diversity in size and silhouette. We also don't want things to be so large that they come across as kind of goofy. We have some of that in game. And it never really feels quite right. You've seen the giant shrews in the Shire and whatnot, and that just feels odd. So I wouldn't expect things like the scorpions, which are already, if you were to compare them to real scorpions, already significantly larger than real scorpions would be. I wouldn't expect them to get much bigger than that. It's important, like I said, it's important for us to have a diversity of size and shape and silhouettes. And that's really what we lean more towards on the landscape. Whenever we're planning the landscape spawns for our region, I always try to work with our content team and the other members of the world team to establish a variety in that, okay, we've got some bipedal stuff, we've got something that's flying, we've got something that's a quadruped, and within those we kind of try to make sure we have a small, medium, large profile, a silhouette that you can kind of look out and see, so you're not seeing things that are all feeling like the same size and shape across the landmark or across the landscape. Boom. All right. Will there be flash floods when it rains? No, we do not have a dynamic weather system as such for that. So no flash flooding. Perks of 115 asks, are missing pages making a return yet? Love those on landscapes. I think you're talking about the lost lore deeds. Those were certainly something that really helped encourage exploration on landscape. They were really the baby of a designer who is no longer here. So I can't say for certain whether or not those sorts of things are part of the deed plan or if they'll make a comeback. It's a nice little town taken over by the Ordekai. Eros216 asks, compared to Swanfleet and Cardolan, which was pretty extensive, how large are these new zones? So this actually came up as a question yesterday from Chris Pearson, because he was preparing himself for his stream yesterday with the One Ring. And in looking at the numbers, we're talking about, if you look at what we did for Before the Shadow with Cardolan and Swanfleet, and you look at what we did for whole cloth new landscape with the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack, so meaning building out Outer Gondor, building out Shield Isles, and the Cape of Umbar, we're looking at an amount of landscape that's around the same size. It might be a little bit bigger because we're pushing more on open explorable spaces. But relatively around the same amount of landscape as we've done with our past 2 big expansion packs. Let's see. So there are some questions, and I apologize as I go through these areas that I'm either not going to answer or not be able to answer because they're not really related to the work I do. But there is one question here from Lumfind. Will there be new Dwarven Halls in one of these new regions? There are not any Dwarven Halls in these new regions. We've done a lot of dwarf stuff. We did a little bit of it as part of Corsairs of Umbar, and I think we're in an area now where we've got enough as far as big cultures go that we don't really need to add more to them. We've got a lot. There's a lot going on here. We don't necessarily need to add more cultures, more Dwarven Halls yet. There are Dwarven clans that conceivably live in these regions, but they are not a focus of what we're working on right now. Will there be little sand devils? So I don't think our spawn profile for this region has them in it, but I know that we do have sandstorm creatures as part of Ureshdar, at least in one monster camp, if not in some of the mixed spawns as well. Royal Ambassador asks, do you know if the hobby system may get expanded upon in the future? So I think, fishing is certainly going to be something that will hook up for this region. There may not be new fish to fish, but it will be available as an option here. I think birding is something that is not... I'm not sure what the status on birding is for this region. It may not happen. It may not be available at the launch for this, but I know there's definitely an interest in that. If your question is in regards to... Oh, hey, we're missing landscape here too. This is the fun of building a kludge build. You get stuff like this showing up. So yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so the as far as other new hobbies go, I think the introduction of birding on the back end did a lot of work to make it easier for us to introduce new hobbies in the future, should we be so inclined to. And I think there is a interest in doing so from members of the team. As to the timing of when that happens, I couldn't say specifically. Alex Mers asks, when creating these new environments, do you travel to immerse yourself and look at the flora, fauna, environment up close? Oh boy, I wish we had the budget for that. That would be amazing. Often what ends up happening is when we do have people who travel and they're traveling for their own fulfillment, they're not traveling as part of business. Often they will take a lot of photos and pictures from wherever they're going. I think we're heading into... Yes, we're heading beyond where I should be going. So for example, we had a world designer who went on a family vacation to Italy last spring, I think it was. And while he was there, he took a ton of photos, kind of knowing that we were coming to Umbar, we were going to be working in Umbar, and we wanted to have some of those Italian Mediterranean influences in the regions that we were building. So he made sure to take a ton of photos of those areas while he was there. He wasn't there specifically for work, but he took advantage of being there to, gather some source material as part of it. Otherwise, we're often looking very closely at other photography, looking at information about what the ecology of these regions are from a research perspective, but we don't actually go physically ourselves. North Phantom 2 says, can you open map of the new landscape? I can. The map, it's not particularly exciting at the moment. It's still our in development map, showing the landscape and purely just the landscape. What you're seeing right here is getting it mechanically set up for us to work with, so that we make sure that the map is lined up right, all of the click-throughs on it work, so that we are doing what we need to make it work mechanically. Over time, this will get filled in with the final map art and whatnot. But for right now, this is just our placeholder development map of all of these regions to make sure that things are functional. Old Bunny says, you said last week that an instance space, there would be an instance space in each zone. Last week it was the salt mine. What's the instance space for this zone? I believe, and I'm probably going to butcher the name of it. I believe it's called the Tombs of Nirzumbarg, and I know I'm saying that very wrong, but the entrance to that is up over here, I believe. This is not my region. Usually, whenever we're working on a zone, working on a region, we tend to divvy it up if the volume is large enough. So we've got 4 regions. Each of our world designers took a region. I actually have 2 regions that I've been building. Umberel was one, Urishtar is the other. So we split up and work on regions individually. And honestly, for me, if I'm not working on it directly, I don't tend to know a ton about what's going on in it. We rely on each other individually to be aware of, or to trust each other to be building the spaces that we're going to be building, and to work with our content designers and systems designers to make sure that everything that needs to happen in these spaces happens. So I believe this is the entrance to the instance for Khûd Zagin, the Tombs of Nirzumbarg. But now I'm going to rocket jump my way out of here. Maybe. We'll see. These walls are much higher than I thought they were. Parkour. I'm going to need a quick drink break. So I'll pause here briefly and take a look at chat to see what other questions we have here in the feed. So YTJ says, now that you are in a region that has very little actual lore from Tolkien, are you using a lot more real-life references for art and such? So I think art-wise, there isn't a lot to go on just in general for Tolkien. There are some things that he's described in detail, and other things that he's like inferred what inspired a given culture. But in general, it's kind of, when it comes to developing the cultural assets, it's up to us to establish the look and feel. There are some things certainly that are like written down specifically in detail that we want to make sure that we nail. But by and large, with each region we build, it's sort of up to us. Like, there was no, when we were building Moria and building Gundabad and whatnot, there was no distinct description of what the pillars looked like and what, the statuary looked like. There might have been one-offs here and there, but there wasn't a overall cultural expression of the architecture and the setting and the look and feel of the space in the materials themselves. So whenever we go to build an area, it's very much us taking inspiration from what there is written and putting our spin on it. Often that means that we look to the cultures and regions that are the inspiration for the places we're going to, and try to find influences from there without co-opting them too dramatically and too specifically, so that we aren't falling into the trap of stereotyping things too much. But yeah, hopefully that answered that question for you. Nizumel says, are you going to add Black Numenorian settlements in the expansion? So I think in this region anyways, and I may be very off on this, Black Numenorians are very much associated with the Church of the Lidless Eye, I believe is what it was called. And so the instances, and I mean like the occurrences of that church, are where you're likely to see the Black Numenorian influences. Heck1UC says, I may be late to this. Is there a new class? There is no new class for this expansion pack. No level bump or anything like that. Usually when it comes to expansion packs, we try to alternate, kind of. We don't want to introduce so many classes and so many races that it becomes fatiguing for players. We don't want you to feel like you're always having to level up something new and learn new gameplay and whatnot. It's nice to have that little bit of break. It's the same kind of thought process behind like why we're not just constantly releasing new neighborhoods for housing. We want you to have a little bit of a break, a little bit of time to digest what's just come out. So this expansion pack is very much that. It is a more good stuffs, but not new classes, new level break, new race kind of expansion pack. Let's see. B. Smith asks, are some of the older maps going to be updated with the modern style? So I've mentioned this before. Whenever we update old style maps to the new style, it's usually when we have a reason to do work in that region. So if we are, revamping the content flow for an area, for example, that would be a reason for us to go through and do a new map. Or if we are doing work in an adjacent region and we need to update that map in order to support changes to the landscape that would impact that map. So for example, when we were doing the Before the Shadow expansion pack, Swanfleet and Cardolan butted up against many regions that had the old style of map. And so we wanted to make sure that there was kind of a consistency between the changes that were happening there. So I would say expect updates to maps when there are significant enough pieces of region work and changes to regions to justify a map change itself. General from Eros 216, general development question. A lot of bodies of water don't allow you to see to the bottom. They're murky. Is it possible to do that with the engine? We can certainly do that. I think it's more of a stylistic choice. And we've also had a lot of changes that have happened to water over the year, and we have a lot of water types. Certainly, and we can go back down here to see what was in the dry riverbed here. I forget what was the name of this river. This was the River Usul, which is a dry riverbed now. Once used to be flowing, but now dried out. There are a lot of our water has the ability to kind of water fog after a certain depth. And that water fog can come in sooner or later, depending on the look and feel that we want for that water itself. Another thing that impacts how deep underneath the water you can see is how reflective the water ends up being. So you can see here in this water, you can see through to the ground underneath. This water type is set up to do that. Whereas like the water on the river Ikerbon, for example, you can, on the very shorelines, you can see through and to the ground underneath up to a certain depth, and then it fogs out and you get that kind of rich, tropical green blue water look. So Willy Billy Silly asks, is this going to be an expansion? Yes, this landscape that we're running around in right now is the second region being introduced as part of our Legacy of Morgoth expansion pack that's coming out later this fall. I know a lot of people have questions about pre-sale, questions about release date, questions about preview times, when you're going to actually be able to get in to run around in these spaces themselves. That information is stuff that you'll kind of have to wait on official announcements for. This platform, anyways, at least this stream, I don't have any dates that I can make available to you, but I encourage you to keep an eye on the message boards, keep an eye on Twitter, keep an eye on Facebook, and other avenues of announcement other press releases and whatnot for that information. So here we're running, I think this is one of the dead groves of the Kintai. So throughout these regions, with the exception of Urashtar, there are these groves, these oases, that the Kintai elves called home. Some of them are in better shape than others, and right now we're in one that is in not great shape at the moment. Let's see. So, Death and Below asks, will you guys ever finish Mordor? So like so much of our landscape, there is a lot to build and a lot for us to look at and to see and to do. I think at some point it would not surprise me if we got back to working in Mordor and working in areas like around the Sea of Nirn. But it is not where our current direction is. Hairfair88 says, no new level cap. There is no new level cap and level adjustment planned for this expansion pack. I like coming up here. This felt good, just like kind of coming up out of that trench up into the sandy wastes and still seeing the peaks of Jarush sticking up over the dunes. That feels really nice to me. Wayfinding is always important on the landscape. You know, you want to be able to be in a spot and then be able to turn around and see something of interest, something that kind of compels you to go in a certain direction as you're wandering around. Old Time Lotro Player says, when does it look like the Elf Avatar update might be ready? I know our artists are working on it very diligently and are preparing to get like internal unit testing on it. I don't know when public testing is going to be available for it, and I'm not sure when the intended release date for that is. That is another thing that I would say you'll need to wait for an official announcement on, more so than hoping I have any tidbits for you. Brewsteer asks, are all these new areas level 150? Yes, these are level cap regions. These are level 150 regions, 4 of them. You've got Amberil, Khûd Zagin, Imular, and Urashtar, all coming up as part of this expansion pack. They're all level 150 regions. Yeah. Lacrimozia asks, hi, maybe this has already been asked, but when can we expect the new raid? So the new raid, I don't believe we will be launching it right with the release of the expansion pack, but we do intend to have it available fairly soon after. I think the general idea is to allow players some time to consume the landscape content and enjoy the other 3 instances that are coming with it. There's 1 3-person instance and 2 6-person instances to kind of help you gear up for that raid. That will be available shortly after that. All right, time for another drink. All right, so why did you create a mountain range between Umbar and Amberil? I remember you saying that there was a wall. Wouldn't that work as a barrier? So some of it is, it's difficult to build in a region that is also live. So we have that barrier between Amberil and the Cape of Umbar, excuse me, that exists currently. And honestly, there's like some of it that I kind of like the look and feel of it. I like the feel of having that wall perched up on it. Doing with further polish, I may like smooth that out a little bit more. But right now, that because the wall is there and the cliff is there, it feels like kind of a good combination. Not to say it won't change between now and the launch of the expansion pack, but that's just kind of my take on it at the moment. All right. Mario Justum says, if you could visit another existing area in a Tales of Your style zone, which would you be excited to do? Is creating a different time version of an existing zone an interesting and fun challenge? I do think it's an interesting and fun challenge. Um, I think it kind of forces you to evaluate what makes a region look good, feel good, what makes a region click, and then makes you think about a yes and kind of scenarios. Like, yes, this is blah, but what can we do to it to, make it feel new and fresh? I think for me, an area that I would have fun doing a Tales of Yore is Fornost and Numenos, or even Fornost and Evendim. You know, seeing what those cities looked like before they were sacked, or even seeing them while they are in the process of being sacked, would be interesting to me. Um, I think there were attempts in the past by other developers to kind of get maybe a skirmish version of Fornost up and running, because there are versions of it that look a bit more pristine, though very, very unfinished. Um, but yeah, I know, and it's something we've talked about, not in the not too distant past too, about like, what could Fornost look like if it was, back in time. Um, Relevant to this here, not necessarily in the past, but now we're starting to see a little bit more green eking in, and that's because we are quickly approaching one of the other elf groves of this region, another of the Kintai groves. This one, unlike the other one that we went in, is actually lush and live and under the protection of the Kintai, um, which is why it has not fallen to the wastes of Khûd Zagin and to the assaults of the Ordokai. Let's get through these boxwoods. I think one of the things that I might suggest to our world designers, is as we get into kind of polish mode, and I think I picked the wrong alley here. No wonder, it's very hidden. Is reducing the frequency and size of these bushes. All right, I think that would have been walkable. Any possibility? So let's see. Old time Lotro player says, if you do finish Mordor, will we be able to get to the top and have the ability to push hobbits into Mount Doom? I'm just asking for a friend. I think Mount Doom is Mount Doom, and I wouldn't expect changes to happen to that specifically if/when we go back to explore more of Mordor, because there is so much more of Mordor to explore than just what has been produced thus far. Here we go. We're dropping down. We're taking a different route in. I wonder how many of the Kintai have been like surprised by random adventurers just running off the cliff and landing in their camps. There's got to be like a small corpse pile there or something. And I'm not sure what the state of build is for this particular area. But we are in, I think this is one of the Kintai groves. There are unique trees. There are trees that are unique to these groves. You see here the white trunk, red leaved sarlashi. And there's story associated with these trees and why these trees are like they are, how they are, and what's going on inside of them. Bear in mind, so we see our elves here. These are not our Kintai elves. We're waiting on the final art for these, but these are all of our in progress NPCs. Nizumel says, any possibility of Lotro to go into south of Harad? Eventually, yes. That is definitely a possibility. When that will happen, that is much less definable. we have a storyline. We're currently talking about what we're going to be doing as far as landscape goes for next year. Um, that kind of information we kind of keep close to our chest until we're ready to really start talking about it. People that are paying attention to the story might have a good sense of where that story is going to take us. Um, so I'm just noticing the time. We've got a little bit left, so I want to rocket jump myself up into the last sections of this region. And then to kind of cap it off, last time I did a preview of the night sky, which looks great and love it. I wanted to cap this off by showing off the sandstorm day files that are going to be happening in here. The sandstorms are not, they are driven, they kind of replace our rain and thunderstorm day files that help it happen elsewhere. So, for example, if you're in Amberil, you'll get kind of a rainy day. You cross the river and you head south into Khûd Zagin. That rain will turn into sandstorm. Let's see a couple more questions here before I continue too much further. All right, so let's keep going. Our Eros216 says, are any new low-level zones being considered? So I certainly have ideas and some initial planning in place as to, what am I running into? As to when something like that will be launched. I don't have any specific information I can give on that. Right now, our principal focus is on getting this expansion pack wrapped up and out the door. And then after that, we can kind of take a little bit of time to kind of decompress after our expansion pack cycle. And then we'll switch into thinking about what's next. And as far as what's next, maybe that includes a new fill in the gap region. Maybe it just has us rolling right into what our next bit of development is. It all depends on timing and availability of various people. So I want to try to get to our last hub, which is the hub of Galbaru. I want to get there, and then I'll pop back out into the desert so we can take a look at the sandstorm. So John Runghold says, are you planning to do more advertising for the game to increase the number of players? 2 new servers in particular have been very well received, haven't they? So I can't speak specifically to any direct marketing campaigns. I do have to say that there has been a huge increase in the amount of like streamers and whatnot that we've seen regarding Lord of the Rings Online, particularly in association to the new legendary servers, Mordor and Angmar. So we've seen a lot more people streaming that and talking about that online. We've seen more articles for Lord of the Rings popping up because of that. And, I think we're just in general trying to sort of increase our footprint on platforms like this ourselves. I've been doing my monthly streams. Orion and I want to start doing our tandem streams together more regularly. So I think those kinds of things, you can expect more from us. As far as advertising goes, ads and whatnot, I can't speak to any of that directly. Sam Burke asks, Lothlorien also needs safety rails. Maybe elves never need safety rails. Legolas' ability is on all elves. I joked when I was building Gundabad, my regions of Gundabad, how OSHA had come in and put up railings everywhere, because one of the lessons I learned from building Moria was there were a lot of pitfalls and a lot of dead drops all over the place there that led to many player defeats. So with Gundabad, I was very specifically working to kind of help the players help themselves. I think with Lothlorien, if we have a reason to go back and do that kind of work in Lothlorien, I don't see why we wouldn't also add railings, but I don't foresee us having any real specific intention for going to do that, going back to do that work in Lothlorien at this time. All right. So I'm going to get myself positioned in a spot that has a great view of things. We're coming up on Jarush again, so we kind of looped back around to where we were before. I might like rocket jump myself high up. No, actually, I think I want to do this here. This is a nice spot for it. So we're going to cap off our stream tonight by showing off the weather system associated with storms and whatnot here in Khûd Zagin. So here we have our stormy day file. I want to set you right smack dab in the middle of the day. So here, the fog comes right in. You've got this dusty landscape experience. You've got the thunder and lightning going off in the clouds above you. This is really a very different feel for weather than I think we've had before. We've done stuff similar to this with blizzards in areas like Foreshell and the Misty Mountains. But I feel like those blizzards were more meant to be hazards when you're in an area. Whereas I think this pushes the fog back just a little bit so you can still see silhouettes of things in the distance, but obscures things. It makes this whole area feel just a little bit more mysterious. When this actual weather is actually happening, as opposed to me faking it, there will also be particle effects associated with it, kind of further emphasizing the effects of the storm. So we had one comment in there from someone saying, old-time Lotro player saying, I want to be blinded. You say that until you have to deal with this for a whole day, and then it's less appealing. But yeah, so here we are. We are at the end of our stream now. So thank you, everyone, for coming, hanging out, asking questions. Thank you for coming last week. Honestly, like last week, what I think was one of our most successful streams. And hopefully we can kind of keep that momentum going with this as well. We've got a few more weeks left of our streams. We've got Imular next week for our third preview stream. After that, we've got Urishtar, which will be our last landscape stream. And then following that is going to be our instance interior stream, where we're just going to pop in and take a look at what the instance interiors for all of the expansion packs look like. I know we have a ton of events happening in-game as well. I believe Bilbo's birthday is coming up, so looking forward to that. Also, keep an eye out on social media, on the message boards, for announcements regarding when our pre-order for this expansion pack is going to happen, for when we have information about release date, those sorts of things. Keep an eye out for those things. Anyways, thank you so much for all of your questions, for being here, for hanging out, for taking a look at Khûd Zagin with me. And I look forward to seeing you all here next week for our stream of Imular. Have a great afternoon, everyone.